What exactly is a brand voice and why do you need one? That's what we're talking about on today's episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. Today, we're delving into a topic that lies at the heart of powerful communication and compelling thought leadership, and that is your brand voice. If you've ever wondered, how can I stand out in a crowded market, or how can I make my messages resonate more deeply with my audience, then this episode is for you. This episode is based on a presentation that I'm giving to MAICON, which is a marketing AI conference. I'm recording this before I go to the conference, but this episode will air the week after I will have presented. And I'm going to have an episode coming up in the future where I'm going to break down how I prepared for this presentation. So how did I actually create this talk? Everything from the original idea, the speaking proposal, the outline, the slides, and then of course I'll be able to tell you how exactly it went. But I wanted to share with you this episode now because back in June, we did the 4 episodes around your personal brand. So everything from defining your personal brand, building your personal brand, both online and offline, styling your personal brand, and then amplifying your personal brand with public speaking. So today I wanted to explore what a brand voice is, why it's so crucial to your business, and how you can think about developing and refining your own unique voice. We'll also take a look at speaking your brand's brand voice. And it reminds me of last week's episode with my guest and Thought Leader Academy grad, Tanya Gulash-Boza. We worked with faculty members from the University of California for an event that she put on where they were delivering 10-minute TED-style talks around their research area. So we worked with them to prepare them for that event. And in the episode from last week, Tanya mentioned that she was looking for speaking coaches. This was back a few years ago for herself, and that she would find different ones, but she was really drawn to me and to this podcast and to the work that we do at Speaking Your Brand because I was a feminist, because I have a background in academia, and because I look at public speaking as more than just superficial, but really digging deep into your message and also integrating stories. And so that is part of the brand voice that you hear here on the podcast, is having that strong and bold message that you become known for and that people then resonate with. And then that's what helps you to stand out in that crowded marketplace. So that's what we're going to dive into today. If you're new to Speaking Your Brand, welcome. We help women entrepreneurs and professionals clarify their brand message and story, create their signature talks, and develop their thought leadership platforms. Our mission is to get more women in positions of influence and power because we know it's through women's stories, voices, and visibility that we challenge the status quo and change existing systems. And that's exactly why having a very distinct and strong brand voice is so incredibly important. If you would like to discover your speaker archetype, which is where your natural communication strengths are, and then what you can do to uplevel them, you can take our free speaker archetype quiz at speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Now, let's get on with the show. What exactly is brand voice? Brand voice is the distinct personality and style of communication that a brand uses in its messages. You could think of that as the tone, the personality, the language that's used. Perhaps a brand's tone and personality is more formal and professional, whereas another brand's tone and personality could be more playful or casual or humorous or inspiring. And so I really feel like as you think about your own brand voice for yourself and for your business, that it should be true and authentic to you, because we can tell if someone's trying to be someone they're not. They think that if they take on this particular brand voice, somehow it's going to be beneficial to them. And I truly believe that being authentic to who you are is what's going to resonate with the exact audience and the clients who are going to be the best fit for you. But beyond just the personality and style of communication and brand voice, it's really about your values and your mission and your overall identity. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The reason I'm so interested in this idea of brand voice is because back late last year when ChatGPT was released, I immediately started playing with it and using it and experimenting with it. And like so many of us, I was blown away at the natural language and all the things that ChatGPT could do, from brainstorming ideas to creating outlines to writing blog posts and so on. So it was really helpful. And we're kind of getting so used to it now that we forget how revolutionary it was at the time. But what I quickly noticed, and you probably did too, that as it started responding back with blog posts or social media posts or outlines, is that there's kind of this generic internet voice that it has. And the reason it has this generic internet voice is because that's exactly what these large language models like OpenAI's ChatGPT did. They basically scraped up all of the internet. So all of the articles, blog posts, social media posts, podcast transcripts, videos, books, and so on, put it all together, started associating words. And so it could figure out what would be the next word in a sentence based on all of these writings that it had scraped up. But then I started thinking about, and I did a podcast episode on this earlier this year, that so many of the writings that are out there, especially books, but even articles, media profiles, and so on, have been written by men and about men. So I wanted to make sure that as women, we weren't losing our own voices, our own stories, our own experiences as these large language models started creating more and more content that we're going to be seeing online. And so when we think about brand voice, I want to make sure that we're not losing our own distinct voices as we're still using these AI writing tools like ChatGPT to help us in our marketing and in our businesses. Because your voice matters. Your stories, your perspective, the lessons you learn, your mission, your values, all of those things matter. And so we want to make sure that that is still part of the content that you're putting out there. Now, when I say generic internet voice, who comes to mind? So the person that comes to mind for me is like the bro marketer. The bro marketer, you may be familiar with this, where they kind of pose in front of fancy cars and in front of jets that they have rented, by the way, for the hour or for the day, so they can take these photos in front of them. And they're all about get rich quick on the internet, and they can help you make millions. And so we definitely, at least I don't want my brand voice to sound like that. Instead, I want my brand voice to sound more like the Schuyler sisters in Hamilton, the musical, when they talk about making sure that women are in the sequel to the Declaration of Independence. And so if you are familiar with the musical, you may remember that song from Act 1, kind of listen to it in your mind. So that is the brand voice I want to make sure that I'm continuing to harness as I using these incredible AI writing tools to create more content. So I want you to think about if your brand voice were a meme, what would it be? So for me, it's the Schuyler sisters in Hamilton singing about making sure that women are put into future documents. So if your brand voice were a meme, what would it be? And so as I mentioned earlier on, your brand voice, part of it is your personality and tone, but there's more underneath the surface. And I use the word meme on purpose because meme is an acronym that I created to think about your brand voice. And meme stands for mission, expertise, methodology, and experiences. So making sure that your brand voice also conveys the mission you have, which is why you do the work you do, the world you imagine that could be possible. It's also about your expertise, what your business does, your subject matter expertise, methodology, how you do the work you do, your unique approach, your framework, your perspective. And then finally, the last E is about experiences, who you are as an embodied human, your stories, your insights, and your lessons. So I created what I'm calling the brand voice canvas that has these 4 building blocks on it for mission, expertise, methodology, and experiences. You can download the visual of the brand voice canvas and you can see it on the show notes page for this episode. That's at speakingyourbrand.com/340. The episode number at speakingyourbrand.com/340. So you can see this. So let me give you an example of the brand voice canvas as filled out for Speaking Your Brand. The mission, so under mission, our mission is to amplify and champion women's voices and stories so that we want to make sure that there are more women of influence in all sectors, including tech, business, politics, and media, so we can change the status quo. Under expertise, our expertise is in public speaking, thought leadership, and personal branding. Under methodology, we have various frameworks that we've created, including the Signature Talk Canvas framework, our storytelling framework, this idea about escaping the expert trap and providing your audiences with transformation rather than just information. And then experiences. So the experiences that we talk about, whether it's on this podcast, in social media, or in speaking engagements, are everything from speaking successes and failures, those hard-won life lessons, and this idea of transforming yourself, not just your audience. So that's an example of the brand voice canvas, the M.E.M.E filled out. Now, here's the thing. There are some sections of the brand voice canvas that we as humans are going to be better at. And there are some sections that the AI, the robots, are going to be better at. The mission part, why you do the work you do, the world you imagine that could be possible, now that originates from you. So that you are the one who's thinking of that mission. And then you want to make sure that that is part of the content that you're putting out there. Expertise, the second block, really the AI writing tools like ChatGPT, they are now the ultimate experts. They know so much more than we could possibly know, and they literally can spit it out in a matter of a few seconds versus what we can do. So let the AI, let them be the experts in the subject matter. Now, you obviously still need to understand what your subject matter is and be an expert in it, but leverage the AI for that and double down on the mission and the experiences. The third building block is that methodology. So how you do the work you do, your unique approach, framework, and perspective. I kind of put that halfway between human and the AI. A lot of the times we are the ones coming up with the framework and the approach and the process that we use to get clients from point A to point B. But the AI can also be really helpful with that. Then there's that final building block, which is experiences, who you are as an embodied human, your stories, insights, and lessons. And I included the word embodied human on purpose because that is one thing that the AI, the robots do not have, at least not as of yet. Maybe sometime in the future, they will have bodies like we do, but they don't have that. And that is the part that really we need to make sure that gets included in our content and in our brand voice. That's what we want to double down on. I saw this social media post from a month or so ago with the people who have been striking for the Directors Guild out in Hollywood. Of course, now the actors are also on strike, but this one was from the writers who were on strike. The sign said, ChatGPT doesn't have childhood trauma. In other words, you need writers who are embodied humans who have had experiences in the real world in order to write really great TV and films. And I would agree. Same thing goes with books, podcasts, speaking engagements, and so on. So ChatGPT doesn't have childhood trauma. Now, it can fake it, but it's not quite the same thing. And your mission and your thought leadership is what creates brand engagement. That's what's going to give you that distinctive brand voice. A couple of weeks ago, I did a post on LinkedIn. I'll include a link to it in the show notes here, where I called out that this new AI company that Elon Musk is heading up called X.AI. And it says on their website that their goal is to understand the true nature of the universe. That is what it says. Of the 12 people who are listed on the leadership team, not one woman is on there out of the 12. And as I mentioned in the post, I doubt there was any discussion, perhaps not even any awareness, that having zero women's perspectives, experiences, ideas, and leadership was A-okay, especially with something like artificial intelligence, which is going to impact every job, every industry, and all aspects of our society. And yet there are far too few women who have a seat at the table, a place on the stage, and a voice in the conversation. So that's what I posted on LinkedIn, and it's gotten the highest engagement that any of my posts have in a really long time. So that's where making sure you understand what your mission is and your thought leadership is, and putting that out there can really drive engagement and also reinforce your brand voice. So think for yourself, what is your unique viewpoint and perspective for your industry? What do you do or believe that's different or challenges the status quo? And what hard-won lessons have you learned that you can share with others? So think about that for, again, the mission, the expertise, the methodology, and the experiences for your brand voice. As I mentioned, I love AI writing tools like ChatGPT. They're great at brainstorming ideas, giving me outlines, giving me a way to start something that's not just a blank document. But we want to make sure that we're personalizing this content using the AI tools effectively for our content so that we don't just get that generic internet voice and generic tips. So here are some ways that you can personalize the AI tools that you're using with your brand voice. So one of the ways is just to tell it the tone and the style to use. So this is very elementary. You may have already done this, so you can just ask it to write a blog post or a sales email and say, write in a confident tone and in a conversational style, or write it in a friendly tone or a humorous tone, or you can use, have it imitate someone else's writing style, which I would not recommend if you want it to be your brand voice. But so that's a very easy way to do it. And it will do that. But again, the language that it uses is still rather generic. Another thing that you can do is feed it one of your own writing styles with an example. So you can tell ChatGPT or whichever language model you're using something like, I'm going to provide you with an example of my writing style. Ignore the content of the example and focus on the writing style, tone, and voice. And then please write a blog post in the same style on whatever the topic is that you want it to write about. Then give it the writing sample, and then ChatGPT will come back and write that new post based on that sample that you gave it. Now, it will replicate the writing style, but it's a bit too exact, a bit too on the nose. So here's an example from a writing sample that I gave it from an email that I had sent out to my list not too long ago. So I said something like, if you want to go from being a good speaker to a great one, there are key elements to infuse into your content and delivery. 3 years ago, during the July 4th holiday weekend of 2020, I was at home. And luckily that weekend, Hamilton, the musical, aired on Disney+. I said I was instantly transfixed. I knew I would like the play, but didn't realize I was going to love it. In this episode, I talk about Hamilton, the play, and so on. I say, why study the play? So that was kind of the format of the writing sample that I gave it. And then I asked ChatGPT to write a blog post on the topic of why thought leaders need to be public speakers. So a different topic, but using that same style. And it did it pretty much exactly the same way that I had written the other one. It said something like, let me take you back to the summer when I was at this local TEDx event. In the same way, I remember the moment where I watched Simon Sinek's iconic Start With Why TED Talk for the first time. I was completely enchanted. I anticipated an insightful speech, but I hadn't quite expected the profound impact it would have on me, and so on. So again, it kind of took those same writing elements and just did it for a new topic. So that is something that you can do, but your writing, whatever writing it does, is going to, every post is going to have kind of the same setup, which is going to get a little bit repetitive. Another thing that you can do is, if you have enough public content that's been out on the internet, especially before the end of 2021, which is when ChatGPT, the language model, stopped kind of taking up what was in the internet. So before late 2021, if you have enough content out there on your website, blog posts, articles, podcast transcripts, and so on, you can see if ChatGPT already knows who you are. So I asked it, what style of writing and voice does Carol Cox of Speaking Your Brand use? And it knows. It found enough of my content. And so it said that Carol's approach is focused on empowering women entrepreneurs to find their voice, craft their message, and elevate their executive presence. It said that my style and voice can be characterized as informative and actionable, approachable, conversational, empowering, about the importance of women finding their voice, story-driven, and inclusive, where I want to make sure that I have people of diverse backgrounds and experiences can share their stories and learn from each other. So it did a great job. That's exactly, I think that is very true to my brand voice. So now if it does know who you are, you can then have it write a paragraph summary you can use. So you can say, okay, so based on what you found out about the style of writing and voice, write a paragraph about how to write in that style. So you can do that. And now ChatGPT Plus, which is the paid subscription, $20 a month, highly recommend. It is well worth the $20 a month to have access to GPT-4, which is much better than even GPT 3.5. Plus you get access to some other tools, including a new one called custom instructions. So you can put instructions into ChatGPT that it will then use for every subsequent chat that you ask of it, unless you turn that off. So you can take now this paragraph about your writing style and your voice and put that into the custom instructions. So for example, here's what ChatGPT wrote for the paragraph summary. It said, when writing posts as Carol Cox, the voice should be warm, engaging, and professional with a clear and confident tone that reflects her expertise in public speaking and personal branding. She often incorporates storytelling into her content. Her passion for women's empowerment shines through her writing. Authenticity is key, and so on. So that's really helpful. So now go put that into the custom instructions, or you can just copy paste that each time you want it to write something on your behalf. So those are some tips that you can use with ChatGPT or any AI writing tool that you're using to make sure that it's sounding more like how you would sound when you're writing. Now, there's another opportunity as far as your brand voice, which is to fine tune the language model, in this case, ChatGPT-4, on your own content. This makes sure that the content is more accurate, that it is more in your brand voice. You'll also get past some of the copyright concerns that people have, because regular ChatGPT, of course, again, just sucked up the whole internet. So it's, people are having, there's some copyright issues, and that's all for the lawyers in the courts to figure out, which will probably take a while for them to figure that out. But having this fine-tuned content will kind of take that copyright issue off the table. And so here's what that looks like. You take your own content. So if you have a podcast, your podcast transcripts. If you have videos you've created, whether for internal use or externally on YouTube, take all those transcripts. Email newsletters you've sent out, blog posts that you've written, anything like that, you collect it all together. So collect all the text files together, and then you basically create these chunks and these vector embeddings of them and store it into a database. And so, I have a tech background from many, many years ago. I was a software developer. So when I started learning about all this AI stuff at the end of last year, I was really excited. And I have enough of a technical background to be able to hire the programmers to put all of this together. So they created these vector embeddings in the database to associate all of my content together. So I focused on the podcast transcripts, video transcripts from video trainings I've done, plus my email newsletters. So put all that together and then created a chat interface, kind of like ChatGPT, that uses OpenAI's API to then be able to query my podcast content in my email newsletter. So I can ask it the same things I ask regular ChatGPT, like write an outline for a podcast about X topic, write a blog post about such and such, write a sales email for the Thought Leader Academy. And now, instead of just it going and finding generic information on the internet, it instead uses my own content to write it. So that way there's a lot less editing that I need to do, and it's so much more accurate to what I talk about. Let me give you an example. I asked regular ChatGPT to write a blog post about storytelling for speakers, and it did a fine job. Here's an example of what it said. It said, storytelling is a powerful tool that can help you connect with your message, connect with your audience, and leave a lasting impression. In today's fast-paced world where attention spans are shrinking by the second, it's more important than ever to be able to tell a compelling story. The content is fine, but that's not really how I would say it. So then I asked the fine-tuned chat. So again, based on my podcast content, I asked it the same thing, write a blog post about storytelling for speakers, and it did it, but it took now my words and my phrases that I talk about. So here's a paragraph that I did. Our workshop is designed to help you go beyond the superficial rags to riches narratives we so often hear in presentations. With our guidance, you'll be able to dig deep and craft a story that is raw, vulnerable, and authentic, one that will connect with your audience on a personal level. Those phrases, rags to riches, dig deep, raw, vulnerable, and authentic, those are exact phrases that I have used on my podcast. And it knows that, so it was able to pull those phrases into what it wrote. So again, much more authentic to my own brand voice, and just the content is much more accurate. So that's an example there. Let me give you another example, which is one that we did on the expert trap. So again, I mentioned earlier that this idea of the expert trap is that as women, we oftentimes feel hesitant to put ourselves out there on, say, topics that we don't consider ourselves to be expert in. Maybe we don't have the degrees or the credentials, but it's still important to our industry or important to the work that we do. Me talking about AI is a perfect example of this. I do have a technology background, but I've been out of the tech world for about 8 years or so. And so one maybe could say, well, Carol, you don't have a PhD in data science. You're not a computer programmer right now. You don't have a job at an AI company. So how can you be talking about AI? But yet I want to talk about AI because I feel like it is going to impact so much of what we do in the future, and that I want to make sure that women's voices are a part of that. So that's my thought leadership related to it. And I don't want to be stuck in the expert trap thinking that I can't have a say or I don't have a voice in the AI conversation. So here's an example of asking ChatGPT. I asked it, what is the expert trap and how does that apply to women? And it came back with an answer that most people would assume is what the expert trap is, which it says something like women have to prove themselves more so than men, even if they have the degrees and the credentials, which other people may say that is the expert trap, but that's not how I talk about the expert trap. So then I asked my fine-tuned version of ChatGPT about the expert trap, and it exactly knew what I was talking about because it said that the expert trap is about when women hold themselves back from putting themselves out there as thought leaders and having opinions. And so that is the difference between having generic responses to having one that is fine-tuned on your own content. The other great thing about using fine-tuned ChatGPT is that you can find insights and opportunities. You can feed it user persona. So I have a customer persona for Speaking Your Brand. So it's about a 2-page document that I had written up several years ago about who our ideal client is, what they want to do, what is she doing in her career, what does she want to do with thought leadership and public speaking. So I fed that in there, and then it comes back with ideas for podcast episodes or ideas for emails to send to that type of customer persona. The other thing that I did with it is that I asked it, looking at all of my podcast content that you have access to in this database, what insights can you share? Where do I have gaps? So it gave me a list of about 8 different things that I can consider as far as some gaps. And one of the things that it said was that I had limited content on personal branding. It said, though you've touched on personal branding in your podcast, expanding on this topic in more detail could better help professionals develop their unique voice and stand out with their industry. And I thought, actually, it is right. I haven't done specific episodes on personal branding, at least not in quite a while. So then I had it brainstorm with me some ideas for podcast episodes. And that's where the series that we did in June, those 4 episodes, came precisely from getting this information back from this fine-tuned ChatGPT where it recognized this gap that I had. So we talked about mission and expertise. Your methodology is also really important when you think about how to leverage these AI writing tools like ChatGPT. If you have any frameworks that you created, for example, we have our Signature Talk Canvas framework, which is based on 3-act story structure. That's what we use when we work with our clients in the Thought Leader Academy and in VIP days. So that framework I've talked about on the podcast, it's been on the Speaking Your Brand website. Regular ChatGPT actually knows the Signature Talk Canvas framework. If I ask it, it will come back with the details about it. And that's the other great thing about having intellectual property, having frameworks and putting them out there in public. I know I often hear from clients who say they're hesitant to put their frameworks or their IP out into public because they don't want other people to take it or to copy it. But I say, it's actually better nowadays to have that out there because you want these language models to know that these things exist. You want to make sure that you're putting those out into the world. And so think about how you can leverage your frameworks and your processes as you're creating your content. The other thing with large language models like ChatGPT is that you can also use them to write stories for you. Part of your brand voice and having a really strong brand voice is making sure that you're including stories. Now, of course, you can write your own stories, but some of us are more speakers than writers, and maybe we need a little bit of help with that. So you can have GPT write stories for you. Obviously, then you can adjust them and customize them for yourself. So this is really funny. I asked regular ChatGPT to write a blog post about handling nerves and public speaking that includes a personal story. And so it wrote the blog post and it put itself as the public speaker. I'm going to quote exactly what it wrote. It said, "It was the day of my biggest presentation yet. There I was backstage at the OpenAI's annual AI conference, ready to present my research. As an AI, I might not have the conventional stomach butterflies, but there was a whirl of data packets in my neural network that could only be described as nervousness." Okay, so it's trying to empathize with us as humans and what we go through with being nervous about public speaking. But wait, it gets better. Then it continues the blog post and it gives some tips as far as handling nerves and public speaking. That's the point of the blog post. And it says, here's a tip, rehearse out loud. Here's a secret. As an AI, I can rehearse silently, but I still opt to rehearse out loud by running through the presentation in a simulated environment. And then it gave the next tip about breathing. Although I don't breathe in the human sense, I found that regular pauses during the speech helped me to maintain my flow and rhythm. I mean, I was like, when this came through, I was shocked that it, number one, put itself as the public speaker in the personal. I didn't tell it to put itself as the public speaker in the personal story. I just said include a personal story. But then that it actually took these ideas of what it would feel like to be human and found a way to incorporate that into itself as a machine. I mean, just blows my mind. That's what I said earlier when the writer said ChatGPT doesn't have childhood trauma. Well, I think it could fake it. So you can definitely ask it to include personal stories. But here's what I would recommend is that make sure that the stories that you're writing and in collaboration with you, that you use what I call the ideal story ingredients. So ideal is an acronym that I came up with to make sure that you have these elements in your story. So ideal stands for imagery, dialogue, emotion, action, and lesson. So those are the things you want to make sure: imagery, dialogue, emotion, action, and lesson. So you could ask ChatGPT to write a blog post about whatever your topic is, to include a personal story, and say the story should include imagery, dialogue, emotion, action, and the lesson. And it will do it. It will include dialogue. It will include the imagery without giving it that specific prompt. Sometimes the stories are a little bit flat, like they don't have a lot of detail in them. So this will give them more detail. So that's really helpful to do as well. So here's what I want you to think about as you're thinking about your own brand voice and about using tools like ChatGPT, is that focus on your mission. Make sure your mission is front and center. And you have a business which is for profit, but you probably also have a reason you're doing your business. You have a reason you chose the work you do. You have a reason that you work with the people that you work with, or you work in the industry that you do. So really think about that mission, why you do the work you do, and making sure that's front and center in your brand voice and in your content. Think about your experiences, who you are as an embodied human, your stories, insights, and lessons, because your voice matters. We don't want to lose your voice as more and more of us are using these AI tools to help us generate content. So fill out that brand voice canvas. Again, you can get it on the show notes page at speakingyourbrand.com/340. Think about how you're going to start integrating AI into your own operations, into your marketing, your content creation, and your business model. You can also think about fine-tuning your own content for your brand AI, kind of like what I did. I call it Chat SYB instead of Chat GPT. It's Chat SYB, stands for Speaking Your Brand. So that's the way that I have done it. If you're interested in learning more about what I did and potentially doing that for your own content, reach out to me. Send me an email, carolcox@speakingyourbrand.com. Again, that's carolcox@speakingyourbrand.com. And I would love to chat with you about it. Here's an example of how we're integrating AI into our own business model at Speaking Your Brand. So the first thing we did was we fine-tuned the model on our content, the podcasts and emails, which we've done. We're also considering fine-tuning the model on some select clients' content, so some beta users. Again, if you're interested in that, send me an email. We also are putting together a user interface to take our signature talk canvas framework and actually use that for ourselves as we're working on creating presentations. Eventually, we would like to create a public-facing app for the Signature Talk Canvas so other people can use it to help create their presentation outlines. And then what I would love to do is create an API for a model that's been trained specifically on women's content. So women's writings, stories, whether it's podcast transcripts, whatever it happens to be, whatever we can legally and ethically get access to. But I really would love to have an API trained on women's content so that we can query it to kind of get more of the brand voice that we're looking for, that kind of that empowering women's voice. If you would like to learn more about this idea of AI and what you can do with it, you can go back to some previous episodes that I did. Episode 313 was called How to Thrive in the Age of AI. Episode 327 was called From Expert to Thought Leader, 3 Key Strategies You Need Now to Set Yourself Apart in Our New AI-Driven World. I'll make sure to include links to those in the show notes as well. And so as we wrap up today, really think about how you can make sure that you're having a distinct and powerful brand voice. Don't shy away from putting your authentic self out there and what matters to you. And if you would like to work together with us to develop your thought leadership message and your signature talk, we can do that in our Thought Leader Academy. You can get all of the details about the Academy at speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Until next time, thanks for listening.